buffet in the morning, and people didn't see who was behind them and said, "Did you see that jerk from New York? Didn't even say hi to us as he jogged by?" So I want to make sure to dispel stereotypes. Speaking of which, I do a lot of traveling around the country. And a few years ago, I was in Alaska. This is a true story. I was in Alaska, and you may remember a few years ago there was a volcano going on. You may remember a side debate over whether it was a waste of taxpayer dollars for the government to engage in volcano detection. I'll leave that alone for just a minute. The volcano was going off. There was a brief window of opportunity in which my plane could land. I finally got in, and then I went to a welcoming reception, and people were sort of outdoing themselves to explain to me how dangerous that volcanic ash is. And some people say, oh, if you breathe a lot of it, it'll sort of create a black lung-like disease over the long term. And someone says, oh, that's nothing. If you ingest it, it'll be sort of like fiberglass. It'll really hurt your insides. And then someone goes, no, it's worse than that. It'll turn your insides to a bloody pulp like ground glass. This is my welcoming reception. And then I go jogging the next morning, and I pass a moose in downtown Anchorage. And someone takes me aside, a pedestrian goes, moose kill more people than bears. You better watch out. But there was a bear in this park last week, so you better really watch out. And then the next day, I'm driving, and I pass a landslide over the road. So I go to my next event, and someone goes, oh, you're from New York. Isn't that dangerous? So part of my message today is move beyond stereotypes. First of all, let me thank Hunger Free Colorado, Gabby, and everyone on staff for your incredible work. Let me thank all of you for the work you do day in, day out, building a stronger economy, feeding your hungry neighbors, all that you are doing. You're probably rarely thanked, so I want to thank you. I want to thank Walmart not only for funding this, they fund the New York State Coalition Against Hunger, including a national AmeriCorps Vista program that places AmeriCorps National Service participants working full-time for a year in organizations like Hunger Free Colorado to help people access food stamps benefits. And I particularly want to thank Walmart for not doing the easy, typical thing of just giving out food. They understood that you need more longer-term solutions, and they are actually funding food stamps outreach. They're actually funding public-private partnerships to help more kids get summer meals, and I think that's very forward-thinking. I have some bad news and good news. Which do you want first?
Yeah.
Well, you guys could be New Yorkers if you want the bad news first. Things are rotting and getting worse. That's the bad news. And I have my little cheat sheet here with Colorado statistics. I'm sure you've heard it. But 13.4% of the people in Colorado live in households that can't afford enough food. 1 in 7 people. I've been to Vail. I've seen some nice vacation homes. I know not everyone here is poor, but 1.7 people in this state live in households that can't afford enough food. That was a 24% increase over the last decade. Now, if you found out that there was a 24% increase in, let's say, fires that were caused by man-made or woman-made activities, would you just keep doing the same thing you were doing over and over again? That's just how it is. I don't think you would. This is a crisis, and we need to react to it as a crisis. People aren't quite starving to death in those households. You know, they're choosing between food and rent. They're having much more miserable lives. The parents are going without food to feed their children. They're becoming obese because they can't afford the healthiest food. It's costing our society over $100 billion a year because hungry children can't learn, hungry workers can't work, hungry senior citizens can't maintain their independence. So the fact that we're no longer having people starving to death for now is no real comfort of this problem. We know it's killing us economically in the world's economy, not to mention it is a deep stain on our civic fabric, and I know you all agree. That's the bad news. And further bad news, if Congress actually continues the proposed cuts, and some of the cuts already implemented by the President and Congress in feeding programs and nutrition assistance programs, and poverty programs are not reversed, the problem is going to get worse. That's just the reality. You're ready for some good news, right? I hope so. We can solve this problem in a few years if we take the right steps as a nation, as an economy. We can solve this problem. And I'll explain in a little bit how I'm so confident about that. But just a few more Colorado statistics. I assume you know, unfortunately, that Colorado is in third place, third from last, in SNAP food stamps participation out of anywhere in the country. I don't mean to go other places and bad enough other places. I have plenty of bad things to say about New York, and we're not exactly treating poor people with a red carpet there. But the reality is, Colorado is in third to last place out of 50 states in the District of Columbia in terms of food stamps participation. Among overall population, 57% of the people eligible aren't getting it. Now, 100 minus 57, right? I'm not a math genius. 43. 4 in 10 people eligible for thousands of dollars a year to feed their family in this state aren't getting it. Among working families, it's even worse. I'm sorry, 57% was in 2006. Between 2006 and 2008, the year for which we have the most recent data, it went up to 52%. So that's even higher. So nearly half the people in the state, sometimes you gotta laugh so you don't cry, nearly half the people in the state eligible for food stamp SNAP benefits aren't getting it. Working families, used to be 46% were getting it, now it's 41%. 6 in 10 people in the state who are households that are working, doing all the things society tells them they should be doing, aren't getting the nutrition benefits to which they are legally entitled. However, if this state increased SNAP food stamps participation by just 10%, that would bring an extra $69 million federal dollars into the state. $69 million federal dollars into the state, not only dramatically reducing hunger, but significantly aiding the local economy. Not all spending, or not all tax cuts, results in economic growth. Honestly, some tax cuts may not be spent. Some of it may be spent on a big screen TV or a yacht not purchased, not created in America. The vast majority of food purchased in the food stamps program is grown, processed, manufactured, transported, wholesaled, retailed in America, creating American jobs at every step of the way. So I know this is a generous state. There are many generous people here. If any of you have $69 million in your pocket and you want to donate, that's even bigger than Walmart money, then I'd suggest, boy, it'd be great for you to donate that. But the reality is, forget ideology, practicality. If we want to solve the problem, you got to go for the low-hanging fruit, and the low-hanging fruit is a program that exists, an entitlement program that half the people in the state aren't eligible for, aren't even getting, and if you only increase that by 10%, that would be $69 million. Some of you may be conservative and not even like the food stamps program, and I'll argue later why you should and why you conservatives should like it, but one other statistic, school breakfast. You know, the vast majority of kids in Colorado who get school lunch don't get school breakfast. There are a lot of barriers to that. Some schools don't have it. I think, is that true? In some rural areas, some schools don't have it. I forget whether. Okay, some states have a mandate where they mandate also. Some schools in Colorado don't even have it. Some schools that do have it, it's at hours that are impractical for parents to bring their kids to. In New York City, we have a ridiculous problem. We start serving lunch at 10 o'clock or 10:30. How are they going to eat breakfast? Food in our lives is always the centerpiece. And yet when it comes to education, it's often an afterthought. But if you increase the percentage of kids in Colorado who are eating school lunch, also eating school breakfast, to nearly 60%. So if only 6 out of 10 kids who got school lunch also got school breakfast in Colorado, that would bring $12 million extra federal dollars into the state every year to feed hungry children in a federal entitlement program. Now let me give you what I call a secular parable, a little story here. Some of you guys have been to my fair town, New York, right? Hope so. Hope you had a good time. You saw some of us actually did say hello, and please, and thank you. You weren't mugged within 2 seconds of landing, right? we didn't have the mountains you have, but actually we have less traffic than you, so I gotta laugh at that. Imagine you're visiting us not in 2011. Imagine you're coming to visit us in the late 1790s. What would you see? You'd see people dying everywhere of yellow fever. Now you guys are eating lunch, you just ate lunch, so I won't tell you how yellow fever got its name. Trust me, it earned it. It's a ghastly disease. The death rate was massive, and not just in New York. Philadelphia actually had to empty out the capital during colonial times when it was the capital because yellow fever was so horrible. Come visit me a few decades later in New York in the 1840s, and what would you see? You'd see people dying everywhere of cholera. Again, you've eaten, so I won't tell you about cholera, but trust me, it made yellow fever look like a picnic. And the death rate from cholera was even more massive than the death rate from yellow fever. One year in the 1840s, if you transpose the number of people who died of cholera to New York City today, that equaled 100,000 people dying a year of cholera. 100,000 people dying a year of cholera. That's Madison Square Garden, a place they used to play a game called basketball, but don't anymore. Little joke. Madison Square Garden filled up 5 times over. That's how massive the cholera death rate is. And the rest of the country actually had a cab driver last night who was from Somalia, who emigrated here and telling me about the horrible malaria that still exists in his home country, and among the many reasons he came here for a better life. Well, America used to have massive amounts of malaria. Going a little further south, Washington, D.C., Richmond, Savannah, Charleston, Miami, New Orleans had massive amounts of malaria. In fact, more people were injured in the Civil War by malaria than by bullets. Now, why am I talking about these diseases in a discussion of hunger? Because I believe a lot of the assumptions people had then about these diseases offer us many lessons today about hunger and poverty. People believed these diseases were incurable. They believed they were just a part of the natural environment. They've always been here. They always will be here. They're like the Rocky Mountains or the Hudson River or the Atlantic or Pacific. Some people believe they were God's will. That's why poor people are suffering from these diseases more. It's their fault. They're too dirty. They're too lazy. They have too many children. They drink too much alcohol. You transpose it today, they don't grow all their food in their own garden from scratch and cook it very slowly every night after their 5th job. And that's why they're suffering from these diseases. And people believe, because we couldn't end these diseases, because we couldn't solve the problem, the most we could have is a little charity to make people who are dying of yellow fever, cholera, and malaria marginally less miserable as they died an inevitable death. And so people would wipe their brows, and nuns and other social service workers would wipe their brows as they died and say, that's it, say the prayers. Now, let me ask you this. You didn't know you were going to get a quiz. But please raise your hand, if it's not too embarrassing, raise your hand if while living in the United States, any one of you have ever contracted yellow fever, cholera, or malaria. That's a big audience. A few hundred people know them? It's amazing. They used to be all over the place. Let's broaden this. Raise your hands if you've ever met anyone who, while in the United States, I'm excluding friends in the Peace Corps or something like that, raise your hand if you've ever met anyone in the United States who's contracted yellow fever, malaria, or cholera.